Hey folks, Roland Martin here with Be Woke Vote and also Roland Martin Unfiltered. Today is November 20th, 2018, and we are broadcasting live from Jackson, Mississippi. Of course, here we are, what's up? All right, y'all pointing at me. Okay, cool. Sorry, folks. Of course, we are here covering the Mike Espy race for the United States Senate. Huge day today, of course. He is going to be debating tonight against Republican incumbent Cindy HydeSmith. Election day is 1 week away, just 1 week away. And we, of course, here are at the Marriott, where there's going to be at 11 a.m. local time, noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central. There's going to be a prayer rally. Ministers from all across Mississippi will be here on behalf of Mike Espy. And joining us right now is someone quite known in these parts. He is the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, Chokwe Lumumba. How you doing?
I'm doing well, brother.
Right,
doing well.
Glad to be in your city.
It is my pleasure to have you here, brother.
All right. The first thing I want to start off with, we do have some breaking news. Walmart has announced that they want their donation back from Cindy HydeSmith as a result of the public outrage over her public hanging comments. Just your thought about them making that call today.
Well, I would commend them for that step. That's one step further than she has made for herself. After being made aware of the repulsive and offensive nature of her comments, which is more concerning than even the comments themselves, is her failure to acknowledge the insensitivity of them. And so to simply cast it away as an over-exaggerated phrase isn't sufficient. If I told you that I was gonna meet you on the moon, then that's an exaggerated phrase. But in a state that has the biggest and the history of having the most lynchings in this country, in a state where we still have present day circumstances where lynchings are a matter of concern, to have the song of Nina Simone, Strange Fruit Hanging from Mississippi Trees, all of those things do not make an exaggeration in this space.
And when you, of course, she then said, well, that was a statement about, holding someone in personal regard. And I'm going, I don't quite recall hearing that statement anywhere. I've heard lots of different statements, not that one, by saying that if that person invited me to a public hanging, I'll be happy to be on the front row. Yeah,
that isn't anything that we use in my family or any circles that I am engaged in. And so it is an offensive, repulsive statement, and her failure to acknowledge that simply shows the type of mentality she would be returning to Washington with.
One of the things that has been quite interesting as I have talked to people, and I've seen this on social media as well, it's amazing to hear black folks say, Mike Espy has no shot whatsoever. And certainly understand the history of this state, understand it's a very red state, understand that, but it comes across as this complete defeatist attitude, as if there's just no way possible, it will never happen, when we can go back to folks in Virginia saying the exact same thing about Douglas Wilder, folks saying the exact same thing about Senator Barack Obama when he ran. There are people who run for mayor of certain cities, the exact same thing has happened. Can you speak to that in terms of trying to get black folks in this state to realize that if you look at the hardcore numbers and then black folks vote their power, it could actually happen?
Absolutely. I would actually suggest that as we see elections in Florida, we see the Stacey Abrams election in Georgia, and very proud of the efforts that both of those individuals gave. I would argue that a black candidate winning a statewide office in Mississippi, by its demographics alone, that Mississippi is a space where they could be even more viable. And so it requires that we speak to people's issues, that we speak to their concerns, and I believe that this is a very important election, and I believe that Mike can win it. If people get out, if people understand and vote their interest as opposed to just party lines. I would challenge someone in Mississippi as we're, seeing Cindy HydeSmith and a Republican Party beating the drum about a border wall. I'd ask someone in Mississippi, when was the last time that immigration was your problem? You've been the poorest state as long as I can remember, and no immigrant has taken your job. If it was your job, they couldn't take it in the first place. And so when we're talking about a candidate in Mike Espy who talks about health disparities, a very real circumstance in Mississippi, that's speaking to your interests. When you see a candidate who has experience in agriculture, being the former Secretary of Agriculture, and can talk about incentives for poor farmers and people who are trying to make the very best out of that type of economy, that speaks to your interests. And I hope that people vote their interests as opposed to just party lines.
And that's one of the things, when you talk about interest, we saw this in North Carolina. Reverend Barber talked about being at a parade, and he said a white man, redneck, came up to him, Confederate flag draped around his neck, but with a tear in his eyes, telling Reverend Barber, who was then, of course, head of North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, thanks for fighting for our hospitals. Because what happened was all these white folks in rural North Carolina, when North Carolina Republicans refused to expand Medicaid, hospitals start shutting down. Same thing is being faced here in Mississippi. And so how do you think, how do you get white voters in Mississippi to not say, oh, first black guy, two Democrat, but to say, wait a minute, our health care sucks. We might want to sit here and listen to the candidate who's going to be addressing whether or not we can go into a hospital.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to execute a strategy of operational unity, identifying what our common ends and objectives are, as opposed to our differences, often those differences being fictitious. And as we see a history that focuses more on social issues or issues of race, you later find out that racism does not only have its obvious victims, but it has those people who thought that they were in some way prevailing, and you find that they were victimized as well. And so a lot of the circumstances that fall upon us that don't work to our benefit are more economic of nature. And you have, when I see a president who's a billionaire, but yet he can convince poor white people in Mississippi that he has something in common with him, there's something wrong with that, right? He hadn't been hungry. He hadn't had to make choices of meat and, food on the table decisions, such as many of the people in this state. And so we have to start focusing on our issues, and healthcare. Issues of healthcare is the most common dynamic that leads people into a state of poverty.
I challenged President Obama on this one when he was in office. I said, look, you go to Ohio, you go to Virginia, you go to these suburbs. I said, no. I said, you need to go to the poorest, whitest, most conservative part of Mississippi, of Alabama, of Louisiana, of Arkansas, and say, here are the health stats. this is how sick your county is.
Yeah.
This is how these are your rates of cancer or of obesity or diabetes. And I passed the Affordable Care Act for you.
Yeah.
I said, look them in the eye and then say, and you should be asking your United States Senator,
yeah,
how dare they oppose the Affordable Care Act when it's for sick folks like you? And I never understood why the Obama administration, why the president would not make that direct in-your-face appeal. Because see, I think as long as we have these discussions to black folks, to Latinos, but we don't challenge poor white folks, sick white folks directly on these issues, then you're going to continue to see folks act as if that, oh no, this is not for us, it's for them.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime we fail to make an appeal to communities or to individuals, then we give them reason for saying that they dissented against us. And so I think to your point, Mississippi, change in Mississippi represents change in the nation, because if we can create progress right here in the belly of the beast, then it says something for all of the other communities that are suffering from similar conditions. And so I think it is important that you come in spaces like Mississippi. I think that we've had a Democratic Party that has taken the perspective that Mississippi is a certain red population and a certain red constituency, and there's no need to go there. You have a Republican Party who feels that it's already in the bag, and so there's no need to focus on the issues of people in the state. And so the more that we speak to those people's concerns, identify where they're struggling, and make that real appeal, then I think that can lead to some significant change.
When you're talking, so healthcare is one issue, obviously, that jumps out. You mentioned the issue of agriculture. What other critical issues do you think separates and shows how distinct these two candidates are?
Well, if you're looking at students, Mississippi, Jackson, for instance, is really a college town. We have 40,000 college students. Talking about addressing the cost of education and student loans is a significant issue. Mike and I have talked quite significantly about an infrastructure bill that he'd be willing to propose when he makes it to the Senate. That is a significant issue for a city like Jackson, which has a $2.5 billion infrastructure problem. You see a country with a crumbling infrastructure. And so we need to create a new deal.
Yeah, because I was driving on the road yesterday,
yeah,
and I was like, man, if I hit one more pothole, and again, but it's one. Look, I travel all around the country, and those are things that you see. I look at bridges and roads and buildings and things along those lines, and that speaks to, and companies when they're looking to move in certain places, they're studying the infrastructure. They're studying roads, highways, and bridges, things like that.
Absolutely, and then we go beyond just the things that we see every day in terms of infrastructure. You need to ensure that communities have safe drinking water. That is a part of the infrastructure that supports people, and that's not a mere luxury. That is a necessity, and so there needs to be a serious focus on those type of things. And so I believe that Mike is more than just a candidate that looks like us. He's a candidate that thinks like us, and that's the type of person that we have to put in office.
Trump is going to be in this state on Monday, holding 2 rallies for Cindy HydeSmith. And to your point about folks thinking that let's write this thing off. I tweeted the other day. I said, wouldn't it be interesting? I said Trump holds his rally on Monday, and then a native of Mississippi, Oprah, decides to hold one as well, or even Barack Obama come here. And I've talked to some Democrats. They said, well, we don't really want to make a lot of noise because then that's going to inspire the other side. I said, well, hell, you got to inspire your side.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't just say, well, we're going to play the silent game.
Yeah. Well, I think the secret is out. I think that people know that there's a campaign, and so being reserved about what our ideals are and what our values are, I don't think that is the route to take. And so I think that people are looking for someone who is bold enough to speak to their circumstance, bold enough to say, hey, Trump, the issues of talking about creating this border wall, that doesn't that doesn't change conditions for people in Mississippi. When you're talking about all of these things which are distant realities from the circumstances and the quality of life and the conditions which people are living in, that we need someone to call that out. And so I think that it's important that Mike be there to say, listen, these are the things that are affecting you. The issue of health care is affecting you. The issue of cost of school is affecting you. The issue of infrastructure is affecting you. And be willing to look at a more unified approach to how we solve conditions and look at operational unity in this state.
When you look at black politics, we see a different focus today in terms of the type of folks who are running. When you look at the previous generation of black mayors, whether it was Hatcher, Jackson, Berry, Coleman Young, they were operating in a different world, a world that was just coming out of the 1960s. You're talking about late 60s, early 70s. Stokes also in Cleveland. You had strong affirmative action programs when it came to contracts, when it came to airports, things along those lines. And I get a kick out of hearing people ask the question, well, where's the black agenda of these politicians? And so as someone who's a mayor, can you make a specific black agenda? And what do you say to the people? Or do you say, no, it has to be an inclusive one? And what do you say to the black folks out there who say, well, unless you give me a specific black agenda, I'm not going to bother voting?
Yeah. Well, I think that you have to acknowledge it and make it clear to people that it's not just an illusion, the issues of race. When we consider the history of this country, we find that something hasn't gone wrong in terms of race. Racism is America's original sin. And I would actually shout out Brother Ibram X. Kendi in his book Stamped from the Beginning that talks about how America was built by white men for white men. But beyond that, you have to go into the deeper concerns of why that is the case. Why is there necessary divisions and who profits from those divisions? And then you really find out why people like Martin Luther King became most dangerous in his final days, because he started speaking to the economic interest. And what Martin said to Harry Belafonte, he said, listen, Harry, we're going to win this integration struggle. But I'm beginning to fear. I'm beginning to wonder if we're not integrating into a burning house. I see a system that abuses labor and abuses working people. And he said, we can't just come together on social issues if we're not prepared to talk about how people feed their families, how people take care of their homes. And that ultimately it hinges on something greater than just a question of color. It's a question of ideas. And what are the best ideas and what are the worst ideas? And what the worst ideas are that you can oppress anyone. And so once we delve deeper into that, we truly understand why there is a system that is perpetuating abuses of humanity and perpetuating abuses of one race over another, because there is someone who is economically gaining from that type of division. And so, yes, racism is very real, right? Racism hasn't gone anywhere. We're not in a post-racial society by any stretch. And, while we had Obama in office, those were the questions that were surfacing, and it has not taken us long to see that is still a disease that we are affected with in this country. But we have to also have a long-range sight as to why that is taking place and affect the economic conditions and how we get to a conversation about how we're sharing goods, resources, and power as well.
So there's this article that was in The Nation. Headline was quite interesting. Is this the most radical mayor in America? And it says, Chokwe Lumumba has an audacious plan to make Jackson, Mississippi the most radical city on the planet. Explain that.
Well, that comes out of what was initially a critique of myself and a critique of my father, suggesting that possibly we were too radical to bring people together. And so I, did my homework and looked up the word radical. And, my studies reveal to me that a radical is a person who seeks change. And if we look in our communities, if we look around the nation and we see a need for change, then the reality is that we need to be as radical as the circumstances dictate we should be. If we look across history at those individuals we revere most, here in Mississippi, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, people like Marcus Garvey and Martin Luther King, Jesus Christ, was radical. And so I believe that it is important that we recognize that need for change and meet it and be prepared to take it head on.
Isn't it interesting how, and I've always said this here, that when we talk about the word radical, when it is attached to somebody white, they are called patriots. We call them revolutionaries.
Yeah.
Yet when black folks are called radicals, and who might don berets, or who might wear a leather jacket, or who might just put on a suit.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, America, I mean, white folks freak out, and it's like, oh, they are a threat to our society. That's an example I've always given to folks, that how people look at it totally different when we are called certain things, and then when white Americans are called certain things.
Absolutely. I would take the words of Malcolm, who said that we learned that radical spirit from your history books, right? When you talked about Paul Revere and the Boston Tea Party and you know how they were fighting. I think that when we look at issues facing black communities here in Mississippi and across the nation, and people stepping out and protesting and demonstrating and pushing a progressive agenda, those individuals have a little more to be upset about than the price of tea, right? And so it's important that we speak truth to power, and we speak to people's circumstances, and yeah, it is quite interesting that the phraseology is different, but when you care about something, when I care about my community enough, then I have to be willing to speak to the circumstances which are not conducive to people's quality of life. If I love my brother enough, then I should be able to talk to my brother and correct my brother. And so we should look at this nation in the same regard, that we should love our communities enough that we challenge and say that this doesn't fit, this isn't right, and we need correction.
With that in mind, so I saw an article the other day, it was in Politico, that was championing Beto O'Rourke to run for president. And what I found to be interesting, so O'Rourke ran a statewide campaign. He lost.
Yes.
Abrams and Gillum ran statewide, barely lost. But folks are calling O'Rourke the white Obama. And I'm trying to understand, again, I just want to get your thoughts on this, how this idea that, well, O'Rourke should run for president who lost, but as if an Abrams or a Gillum isn't in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the most difficult person to challenge is yourself, right? And so I think that we see a Democratic Party that needs to challenge itself as well and look introspectively and realize those inequities in how they view certain elections. They both are, all of the campaigns that you mentioned are campaigns where Democrats were able to put up strong opposition in strong Republican territory. And so I don't know that I'm the one to tell you what their analysis is that somehow differs from how Stacey Abrams or a Andrew Gillum differs from Beto O'Rourke. Yeah.
But I just think it speaks to, again, one, folks in my business who are in charge of the framing, in charge of the elevating, and how he has just energized folks across the country. In fact, I ran into a young brother, and I think it was during Howard's homecoming, and who was challenging me about why O'Rourke should run for president. And I said, you do know there are a lot of people who've actually won statewide races that he has to go up against. Yeah. I said, so it's not as simple. This guy was like, well, who else is there? And I'm going, you might want to pay attention to the folks out there. I said, whether it is Kamala Harris, whether it's Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Bernie Sanders, you have others who've jumped out there. I think we're going to have anywhere from 12 to 15 people who are going to run as well. But that's what, when I saw that article, I said, wow. So all of a sudden, oh yeah, go ahead and run for president, as if you don't have black candidates who electrified people, who fired them up, and who also made a huge impact in this election cycle.
Yeah. Well, I would certainly concur with your sentiments that those candidates and those individuals are just as exciting and electrifying as O'Rourke may be. And I think people often fail to recognize their privileged lens and how they see things, and that's on both sides. That's whether someone is conservative or so-called liberal. There is an amount of privilege that does not enable them to see from the full spectrum.
So I got a woman here, Kat Baptiste, who's on Facebook. She says, "I'm from Jackson and live in Iowa, but I am desperate to get back to my city to join the fight and bring us back to the top." All right, so make the case, Mayor, why she should leave Iowa to come back to her hometown of Jackson.
This is where change is happening. This is where the greatest opportunity to truly affect this nation takes place, right here in the belly of the beast, which has such historic significance. But we ask the question to ourselves, what do you do when you see a lack of integrity everywhere you look? And I got this from my wife and one of our favorite shows, Madam Secretary. But they ask the question,
very good show.
What do you do when you see a lack of integrity everywhere you look? You find it in yourself and you begin to change the world from right where you're standing. That is our mission in Jackson, Mississippi, where we want to be more than just a community which is capable of rescuing itself. We want to be a model for the rest of the country and see how we can inspire change, see communities that have voids, economic investment that hasn't taken place, and how do we collectively pull ourselves together so that we demonstrate an ability to fill those voids. And so I think that this is the time, this is the place, and we are the people to see that change take place. And so she needs to come back and join her family here in Mississippi.
And you don't mind a new taxpayer as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I tell everybody, when you come, I hope you fall in love with the city. There's beautiful amenities, but even if you don't, please just leave your money.
Gordon Jackson wants to know, in spite of Cindy HydeSmith's comments, do you still see resistance from white women voters to a progressive agenda?
I think that white women, like a lot of other people in this state and in this nation, can miss the buck and not vote their interest. And so when you're talking about healthcare, when you're talking about providing opportunity for young people, that should speak significantly to women, white or black. And so I would hope that they hear the message. I would hope that they are really paying attention to the policy. I really can't tell you what Cindy HydeSmith's policy is when I see her with a commercial, shoveling, hay, on her horse farm and telling me, I understand you because I'm a farmer too. What is your policy? How are you going to address tariffs and how it's affecting the bottom line for farmers throughout this nation? And so I would hope that those individuals really pay close attention to the policies that are being espoused.
Pamela Husband says, what changes are being made locally to fill the pipeline with next generation leaders?
Well, we are working with our young people and letting them be a part of the change. Often I think that our historic failure has been to speak to the interest of young people instead of incorporating their voice in the process. One of the things that I enjoy most is I have a Mayor and the Millennials roundtable conversation where we talk about issues of quality of life and the things that they find most concerning, what they need and what they desire. And I think that leadership has to take take more advantage of having those conversations and working with them to help frame the agenda. I think that our problem has been when we allow a candidate to step up and tell us what their goal and vision is for our lives. We need to draft and create an agenda for ourselves and support the candidates that support our agenda.
But also I think to that point about millennial voters, and everybody who's watching, we only got a few more minutes left, so if you got questions, you need to go ahead and post them right now on Facebook, YouTube, or Periscope so I can ask it. But this is what I have been saying to millennial voters and Gen Z or whatever new letter we have now. At the end of the day, people listen to people who vote. And you can't have massive numbers. You can't have massive demographic numbers and then you have low turnout numbers. It's the exact same thing that I say to Latinos. You can't tout, this huge Latino population. No, those are demographic numbers.
Yeah.
But then when you look at those who vote, it's not there. The reality is, politicians, whether folks want to be honest or not, listen the most to those who are going to show up at the polls, who are going to cast those ballots, because when you're running, you have to get votes. And I say to young folks, don't just sit there and think that Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. told me a story. These young folks came to him. They said, "Man, if you don't do this, we're going to put you out of office." He said, "I don't give a damn what y'all think." They were like, "What?" He said, "You see that high rise right there?" He said, "That's a senior living center right there." He said, "They going to show up in massive numbers to vote for me." He said, "Y'all going to come and yell at me." He said, "But you're not going to show up at the polls." And that's something that just hardcore. I said to millennials and Gen Z, this is the reality of politics.
Yeah.
You don't show up, trust me, they won't be listening to you a lot.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I don't find that, at least in my campaigning, that you have a demographic in millennials who are unwilling to vote. I think you have a demographic that wants to be inspired and wants to be engaged. And so I would ask who the failure is truly on. If we haven't done the significant or the important outreach to speak to their concerns and to bring them into the fold, then that's something. And we want elections where everyone's voice is heard, where everyone has an ability to weigh into the process. And if we're failing to do that, then we need to change our approach so that we speak to those concerns. I find in millennials a generation of disruption, a generation that has an energy to change things, and we have to concretize that. We have to take it from a mysterious and mystical place and organize it in a way that truly brings about the substantive correction that we want to see. And so the more we engage millennials, the more inclusive they will be in the process. And I think that it is incumbent upon people who are in positions of leadership to make them feel that they are part of something and not on the periphery.
Well, it's also why I say to them, you got to take stuff over. I mean, Reverend Jackson made this point when he spoke this summer to the National Association of Black Journalists. He said, don't just get so frustrated with existing organizations and say, well, I'm just going to run off and start my own. He said, no. He said, take it over. I think about Nikema Levy Pounds in Minneapolis. Young folks there felt the NAACP chapter there wasn't doing enough. They didn't just say, okay, fine, we're just going to go start some other organization that had no infrastructure, that had no resources, that had no history. No, what they did is they saw how many votes it took, went in, signed their own people up, went in and took over the entire chapter of running their own people. And to me, I see the exact same thing in politics. Yeah. That if you are a millennial voter, if you are Gen Z, if you believe that there's something else there, don't just say, you know what, I'm gonna sit this thing out. No, say, okay, how can I mobilize and organize my own folks to say, we're gonna take this thing over? Yeah. And because we saw that in Birmingham, where you did it. You had a generational battle there, and you had the mayor there, Woodfin, who went against
friend of mine,
went against bail.
Yeah.
And people said, man, what's wrong with you? He's an established leader. He said, no, nobody has a lock on these positions. Yeah. And what happened? Yeah. He beat them.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to always be willing to meet people where they are, and be willing to engage, in conversations with people who don't necessarily share the same makeup that we do. And so if you can only organize people who think like you, then you're not much of an organizer. You have to be able to organize and have conversations with people who are of different ages, different political backgrounds. And so I think that is an important thing to do. My father encouraged me to be a part of organizations that I may have had some political dispute with some of their historic positions, but at the same time entering into those allowed me to meet people where they are, learn something, and then also it suggests something about us, a certain kind of political elitism or revolutionary elitism, that you think that you have it so figured out that you can't learn from someone else. And so I think that's always a bad position to take if you feel that you can only achieve progress by starting a new organization. Now, sometimes circumstances call for a new entity, but you often have to place yourself where people are, where organization has already taken place. In the South, you have to go into the churches and places of worship and meet with people and talk to them and express your differences of opinion. I think that's an important process.
Last question. obviously, folks will be getting ready for 2020. I have made the argument that I believe I believe someone who has been a mayor should run for president. And the reason I say that is because I believe that a mayor has to deal with issues far different than someone who has been in the U.S. House or somebody who's been in the U.S. Senate. I think that the same reason why we've had historically governors who've also run for president and actually won. And so with that being said, not who is your favorite, but are there 2 or 3 mayors who you think could make a strong run and a strong case for president?
I'll fall short of an endorsement at this time.
No, not endorsing. Not endorsing, but just thinking about mayors out there. Because when I went on ABC this week, I threw out Mitchell Andrews' name. And I threw out, I said, somebody who's a former lieutenant governor, somebody who, mayor of a city, I said, has had to deal with infrastructure issues, majority black city. As I went through this whole deal, I just think that mayors present a different set of expertise than I think, frankly, folks who are in Congress.
Yeah. Well, I think that the vantage point of a mayor, as you properly recognize, is different. It is actually putting things into practice. As mayor, you can't run from circumstances. When the roads, as you drove in onto today, are in disrepair, you will meet people in the grocery store. You will meet people in church, and they're going to ask you about it. And I think that perspective is a needed one to truly affect the policy that the nation takes on. And so I think that is important. There are several mayors that I admire. I've had the opportunity to meet mayors from all around the world.
Which ones do you admire?
I admire Michael Tubbs, Stockton, California. Randall Woodfin and I are good friends. I admire Steve Benjamin in Columbia, South Carolina, who is the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. There are so many that I like what they are doing. There's an exchange of ideas. I'm a bit shy of naming too many because you inevitably leave somebody out. But those are people that I like what they're doing. I like their willingness to step out and fight for what they see as being important.
All right. Mayor Lumumba, we certainly appreciate you sitting down with us and having this conversation. Glad to be back in your city and certainly look forward to coming back next time.
Happy to have you here, brother. Happy to have you here.
Folks, everybody who's watching, don't forget the runoff in Mississippi is going to be on, the election is on November 27th, 1 week from today. But also absentee balloting ends on November 24th. Folks are going to be coming, I've talked to different groups, folks all over the country are going to be coming into town trying to inspire, encourage others to get out there and vote. If you know folks, you do, you got a family who are from this state, then I want you to pick that phone up to call them, text them, hit them on social media, to tell them they must go out and vote. Because, of course, that's one of the things that we have to emphasize, that one of the ways we are able to impact our society is with the power of our ballot. But let's just be perfectly clear. Voting is the end of one process and the beginning of another. And so not only do we have to vote, we also have to be engaged with those very same people after the election is over, even if the candidate we want doesn't win, because we are still constituents. And so we want to emphasize that for everybody out there who is watching. So please don't forget that. I want to thank the folks with Be Woke Vote for making it possible for us to come down to Mississippi to cover the Mike Espy race. And we look forward to more of our conversations. If you have missed our previous interviews, I want you to go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. You can catch those interviews, including with Derek Johnson, CEO of the NAACP, also with a member of the Panhellenic Council, and we took a tour of the office where Medgar Evers worked here in Jackson, Mississippi, and so you definitely want to see that as well. Okay, folks, for everybody, Roland Martin Unfiltered, we surely appreciate it. Thank you so very much, and we shall see you next time. Thank you.